Life purpose and how that shows in your fingerprints and why that's important to know. That's the topic for today. You knew that. Sat down, you knew that? Okay, well then good, because that's what I'm going to talk about. So my premise is as follows, that there is a life purpose specific to you, a exalted destiny possibility for you, a most meaningful possible life, and that is already printed on your body in the form of your fingerprints from 5 months prior to your birth. So I'm suggesting that each one of you has a specific life purpose. It is knowable in a concrete form, not just by inner delving form. It's written on your body in a specific code such that if I look at your fingerprints, or somebody who studied with me looked at your fingerprints, they would come up with the same reading as to what your life purpose is. So A, there's a life purpose. B, it's written in your fingerprints. And the third piece of what I'm going to be talking about today is why it's important to know what your life purpose is. Okay, so that's what we're up to. And we've got 30 some odd minutes to do that. Let me see here. So I've been doing life purpose seminars for 40 plus years at this point. All over the United States, Canada, Europe. And if we were doing a weekend workshop, I'd ask everybody to take out a pen and paper. You can imagine yourself doing this and write down my life purpose is, and then everybody in the class is going to read off what they wrote down in a few minutes. And at the end of the weekend, after we learned the coding system in the fingerprints and had a weekend to discuss things, we would look again at what we wrote and see how it feels going out of the workshop. So at this point, I hope you're thinking, I have a picture of my life purpose. I know what my life purpose is, or I haven't the foggiest idea, or something in between. So how many of you have a handle? If I ask you to write something down, my life purpose is, does something clearly come to mind? That's my life purpose. This is what I'd write down. How many have not a good idea at all? It's about half and half from my looking out over there. So when I ask that question in different parts of the United States and in Europe, I get different types of answers. So when I'm in New York, where I grew up, when I'm in New York and I ask the life purpose question, somebody will stand up and say, my life purpose is to go public with my company by January 1st, 2000, fill in the date, canoe the entire Yukon River by the time I'm 45, and like that. And that's their goal. It's okay to have goals. Some people have goals that are highly life directive and give them a sense of meaning. I'm all in favor of goals if you want to have them, but that's not your life purpose. That's something different. Life purpose is something soul connected. It's you as connected soulfully as you can possibly be, and it's independent of any circumstance that you're in. You've had the same fingerprints your whole life. That map in your fingerprints is unaltered by whether you've been married, not married, divorced 10 times, won the lottery, lost the lottery. Everybody knows you cannot change your fingerprints. That map has been the same from before you were born. And in our soul's wisdom, we cannot change it, because otherwise we would mess with it immediately. We think we know better. We have an idea. So when I'm in the middle of America, I lived in Texas for 10 years. Anybody else here Spend time in Texas? Where'd you live? Austin. 2 years in Austin. Well, in Dripping Springs, which is now in Austin. You know what I'm talking about. You're from Texas? No, okay. I love my decade in Texas, actually. I have a lot of good friends and family in Texas. I love my time. But I moved to California because I wanted to start a school for hand analysis. And when I was trying to learn hand analysis, there was no school in the United States for hand analysis. Go figure. No school. I mean, there were people who taught hand analysis, but when I searched them out and sat down in their class, it turned out that they knew less than I knew, and I knew less than nothing. They were usually astrologers or something else, and we would just kind of look at hands and grok it out. And, you know, if somebody's heart line looked like this, what do you think their relationships were like? Okay, that's one form of handwriting, but that's not what we do at the International Institute of Hand Analysis. We've passed our 34th birthday just recently. So when I'm in the middle of the United States and I ask people the life purpose question, I usually get answers that are family oriented or religious oriented. My life purpose is to be a good mother. My life purpose is to be a good father. Any mothers here? Are you trying to be a bad mother? That sounds kind of universal to me. And then somebody else will say, well, my life purpose is to follow the good book. And you can decide for yourself which good book they're referring to according to which part of the country we are in and what they're dressed like. But if it's a Christian good book, that's 1.3 billion people with the same life purpose. So that's a person's religion. The New York answer was more a person's goals. Of course, I'm oversimplifying to make my point. You know what the California answers are when I ask what my life purpose is? It's changed a little through the years. I used to get, my life purpose is to grow, to evolve, to serve, to love, to surf the one light of being, and to integrate my, like, that funny? I find it funny. It's kind of cute. And I find nothing wrong with that, except that that's not specific to you. That's a universalism, just like the other ones were universalisms. More recently, I've been getting people tell me, well, my passion is this. Okay, that's your passion. That's good. Passion starts with a P, purpose starts with a P. Maybe they're the same thing. My passion is basketball, but that has nothing to do with my life purpose. So usually about an hour or so into the weekend seminar, people are fussing with their glasses, scratching their head, and realizing that their answer, or at least most people, not everybody, but most people's answers came, they heard them from other people. And I'm saying that you have a very specific thing that you came to do this lifetime, and it's printed on your body just in case you forgot after you were born. So I learned about the fingerprints when I was living in Texas, and I learned about the fingerprints in the Jesse Jones Medical Library. If you have some rare disease, they're likely to fly you into Texas someplace, because medical centers in Dallas and Houston, etc., are gigantic, which afforded me the opportunity to do research in the medical libraries. So I'd been reading hands already for 10 years by then. I had read everything written in English on palmistry, which wasn't all that much back then. There were maybe 250 books. Late 70s. There's now more like 350, a little bit more than that, in English on palmistry. But the medical libraries have even more information on hands and what the hands say about what's going on with you. I didn't know that. And as a matter of fact, when I went into the medical libraries, it took me a day or two to find the information on hand because it's all in code. Doctors don't read hands, they do dermatoglyphic studies. Dermato, skin, glyphics, carvings. Thousands of articles, 6,000 articles back then in the 70s on different medical and psychological conditions based upon your hands, your fingerprints. This is doctors doing palmistry. It was interesting to me that we had two groups of people studying the same phenomenon. We had doctors using electron microscopes and leaving graphs with a lot of numbers behind. And we had hand readers who were part of a tradition that goes back thousands of years. Aristotle was a hand reader and taught hand reading. Did you all know that? Some of what he wrote is still extant. And he said that hand reading is such an ancient art, too bad so much has been lost to antiquity, we'll probably never recover it. This is 2,500 years ago, and there's not much writing extant prior to that period of time. So we've got one group of people who talk in mythological archetypes and stories. They have a tradition that goes back for thousands of years. They've been observing hands and talking to people about what it could possibly mean. And then you have a bunch of scientists and doctors, at least in the Western world. That study began around the turn of the 20th century. And already there's more written about their research than what's extant in the palmistic literature. They're studying the same stuff, and the two groups refuse to speak to each other. The doctors will not acknowledge that palmistry has any validity whatsoever, because there's usually something in the opening. Mom, Dad, you can relax. I'm still a doctor. I'm writing about hands, but I'm not doing palmistry, so you can relax, Mom and Dad. And the number of hand readers who've read the medical literature on hands, I can count it on one hand. I like both systems. I liked sitting myself down and spending all day in the medical libraries learning about how the fingerprints form in utero. I love reading palmistry books. I love reading hands. It's been what I've been doing. It's been my profession for over 40 years now. So apparently, I was the first professional hand reader to hunker down in the medical libraries and read everything that's been written there. None of the other palmists I've met have done that. Huh, okay. So, I'm going to share with you a little bit about what I learned in the medical libraries. And then I'm going to apply it to life purpose. Meanwhile, I hope you're still thinking, my life purpose is, what would give me the greatest sense of meaning in life? What has been a life theme of my search for meaning? What is me most connected on the soul level to a meaningful life that lasts throughout every different section of my life, no matter what's going on? That peace is always there. That's a part of me that was there before I was born. And there's a thread, now that I look at it, there it is. As a matter of fact, when I read somebody's hands, I don't ask them to agree with what I say. This is your life purpose, this is what skill set you have to do it, here's the obstacles that I could see that are apparent. I don't ask anybody to believe it just because I say it. But people start to notice things different once their life purpose has been given a name. There was a therapist who studied with me in Texas for a while, and she said, name it and claim it. Once it has a name, you can't miss it anymore. Once it's been called out, everywhere you look, your life purpose has been knocking on your door. It's everywhere. And yet, in some ways, it's the most abstract thing. It can go right through your fingers. It's like a dream. There's a guy walking around with a sledgehammer. Did you see him? I could see him. It's right behind you. Life purpose is like a sledgehammer. It hits you over the head that strong. And it's ephemeral, like a dream. It's both. It's part of the paradox of being on this planet in human form. So, your fingerprints form 5 months before you were born. So you're about this size when your fingerprints are completely formed. The fingerprints form, I'm reading this in a medical textbook that goes back to the early 1930s. It was the first major textbook written by doctors about fingerprints and other hand markers. Dr. Cummins wrote about this. Dr. Cummins writes that the fingerprints form a topographic map of the developing fetal hand. That's an interesting thing. So, you all seen pictures of developing fetuses? First week, 8th week, 16th week, you've seen pictures of that? When I started reading hands, nobody had seen pictures of that. But we've all seen pictures of that now. You might not remember what the little fetal hand looks like, but I can tell you, it looks like 11 ping pong balls squeezed tight together. Those balls will eventually differentiate. One ball will become your thumb, another each of your different fingers, and then 6 more parts of your palm. But at the 14th week of fetal development, when the fingerprints start to form, it still looks like 11 ping pong balls squeezed tight together. So I'm reading in the medical textbook that the map laid behind at that point conforms to the comparative topography of those different parts of the fetal hand. And I said, just hold it 1 second. Dr. Cummins, apparently you've never read a palmistry book. Nobody has read your hand. Because hand reading, at least half of hand reading, is comparative size and shape. If you have something big in your hand, you've got lots of that stuff. This is very deep. Let me see your hands. Give them a good shake first. This has nothing to do with hand reading. I just like to watch people. Put your hands out like this and take a look around. There are people with bigger thumbs and smaller thumbs. There are people whose thumbs come all the way out and people whose thumbs cozy up. Your little finger, I don't know if you knew this, your little finger has this little twist to that. So while you're sleeping, little gerbils pull your little pinky finger. And is this your pal? You know this person? Why is her pinky so much taller in her hand than yours is on yours? Can you see how enormously large that is? If her nose was that big, everybody would have talked about it as she was in school. Look at that. It comes way above the line separating the upper third of the ring finger. Can you all see that? Yours comes up about to that line. You're a normal person. But your pal, she's long pinky. So you're loaded with pinkiness. You too, you have a very long mercury finger in palmistry talk. And all the different parts of your hands are, to my hand reader's eye, comparatively longer or smaller, shorter or bigger. Long mercury fingered individuals, because the parts of the hands were named for the Greek gods and goddesses. Very few people were reading books back then when the parts of the hand got named, but people knew the stories of Apollo and Zeus and Mercury. It was a codex, so that people could remember things about what their hand reader had said, and they could learn hand reading easier. So you're a long pinky person. What's your name? Nicole is a long pinky person. I'm a long pinky person. We belong to the long pinky society. You, me, and Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes. What is Sherlock Holmes? In what way is Sherlock different than the average person? He's more curious. He's always trying to figure things out. He can't help but try to figure things out. He's weighing, he's comparing, he's contrasting, he's evaluating. He's seeing how the pieces fit together. When the dog didn't bark that night, Sherlock figured out that that was the missing clue. The butler did it. Sherlock figured it out. Were the other detectives terrible? No, but maybe their pinky wasn't as long as Sherlock's. So I like to decode things. I like to look at puzzles and figure out how it's done. It's a good thing I'm that way, since that's what I do for a living. I look at the puzzle of your hand, and that's connected to you, a live human being with a whole bunch of stuff going on and a history and a story that you tell yourself about what your life means. And yet your hand has a printout. It's interesting to compare the story you've told yourself to the story that your hands are saying. But back to the fingerprints. So I get to see, by looking at the fingerprint map, how your mercury finger size and shape was compared to the other 10 little ball-like structures that eventually became the other parts of your hand. In effect, it's like reading the side of the Wheaties box. I get to see how much and which type of each ingredient went in proportion to the others. From looking at that, I could figure out what kind of being, how you built yourself. I could see how baked you currently is. Are you half-baked, full-baked? Are you the person that you built yourself to be? Are you partially inhabiting that, or are you not? Well, I don't know. I can look at handprints on a cave wall from 1,000 years ago. I've done that. I can look at handprints on a cave wall from 15,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago. And I can tell whether or not that was a Sherlock Holmesy type of person that left their handprint on that cave. I have no way of knowing whether that person was a slave working in the coal mines, whatever that equivalent would have been. How would I know? It's just their hands. But I know that they would be doing some sort of inner inquiry and using the benefits of their inquiring mind for the benefit of self and others. I know that's what they would be doing, all things being equal. But all things are never equal. I don't know what your parents were like. I don't know what your background has been. You'd have to fill that in for me when I'm reading your hands. But I can see what you were built to do. In effect, it's like looking at a person's backpack and seeing what equipment you have in your backpack. If there are crampons and ice boots, I guess you're going climbing someplace where it's cold. Otherwise, why would you be carrying that equipment around with you? But that's only half of what I read in the medical textbook. So I'm getting excited because I'm reading that there's a map I can use. I'm looking at myself, I'm reading Dr. Cummins, I'm looking at myself, I'm reading Dr. Cummins. And the next paragraph changed my life. As a matter of fact, I could feel the type of chill going through me now, a slightly smaller version. But I could see me in the medical stacks, piles of medical journals stacked up around me. And I can remember reading the next paragraph in a book that was titled Fingerprints, Palms, and Soles. S-O-L-E-S, bottoms of the feet. Fingerprints, palms, and soles. See, I consider your fingerprints to be a soul mapping. It says from a soul level what it is that you came to do, what your soul's purpose is. And I'm reading Fingerprints, Palms, and Soles. And the discovery in that book that changed my life and changed the entire path, the trajectory of my life and hundreds of others for that matter, is sitting in Fingerprints, Palms, and Soles. So Cummins goes on to say that the same lines that show up on a fingerprint has 50 to 100 lines. You can count and check and see if Cummins was right. But everybody agrees 50 to 100 lines make up a fingerprint. And if the FBI is going to check your fingerprints against the murder weapon, they don't look at the entirety of the fingerprint. They can take a section of line, one of those 50 lines. Because when you blow it up, those lines, they have a fork to the left, a fork to the right. The lines stop and stop, stop and start. There'll be a bubble in the line. It'll curl back around on itself. There's 6 easily classifiable things that fingerprint lines do. Interestingly enough, the same thing happens on sand dune ridges. They have the same characteristics as fingerprint lines. Visualize, if you will. See the sand dune on the big screen behind me. Sand dunes aren't smooth. They have a rippled surface, do they not? Those ripples are not just straight parallel lines. Those lines stop, start, fork, split, bubble. The same things that fingerprint lines do. That's an interesting coincidence, said Dr. Cummins. At the beach, we're near the beach. At the beach, the water recedes. There's ripple sand in the beach, is there not? Yes, there is. The water used to be there, and now there's a ripple pattern in the sand. Different waves will leave a different pattern in the sand. You put your toes to those waves, higher waves, faster waves, they'll leave a different pattern in the sand. There was a chemical suspension in the medical textbook, a picture of one. That means there was a beaker and stuff is settling to the bottom. Electricity went through and it made a pattern at the bottom of the beaker that looks like a sand dune, looks like the beach, looks like your fingerprint. Maybe, I said to myself, actually I didn't say this, an electric shock went through me. It was like waking up in the middle of the night with a technicolor dream. I was just like this. Holy cow. A wave energy imprint has left its mark behind. A high frequency wave energy has left a marking behind. And we can tell the nature of that high frequency wave energy, whatchamacallit, by the imprint left behind. And conveniently, it left it behind in a topographic map form. I probably couldn't decode that. I have since learned that the Navajo Indians have a saying about fingerprints. They say that the Great Spirit breathes in the breath of life, and the tracks of that breath become your fingerprints. I like that. It's either the Great Spirit breath tracks, a holographic imprinting. The doctors say, well, I don't know, it's something. They just move right on, but I didn't move right on. That is a soul map sitting in your fingerprint. So how many of you have had a Myers-Briggs test or some other psychological testing instrument? About a third of you. And the others have heard of this? You answer a whole bunch of questions, and then they tell you whether you're an ABCD type, an LMNOP type, whatever. Actually, it's cleverly done. They say they sell 3 million of those a year. That's 3 followed by 6 zeros. They sell a lot of those. But those of you who've had a Myers-Briggs, did it tell you where your deepest meaning can be found in life? No, it did not. That's not the fault of a Myers-Briggs. They'll tell you what your type is this, your strengths are those, and your weaknesses are over here. That's fine. It would be like asking a Geiger counter to say what color your shirt is. That's not what Geiger counters do. It's not part of the equipment. All the other tests that I've seen, other than the hand test, talk about a person's personality type, strengths and weaknesses. This is useful to know. Have you learned anything about yourself through the years? Are you a better version of you than you used to be? Are you learning from your experiences? I assume so. Things that would have overwhelmed you in years past, you could now handle at least somewhat better because you've been there before, you've learned. But your fingerprint is a different type of map. Well, I like to call it your soul psychology map. So each person has 3 maps. You have a soul psychology map that is unaltered from prior to birth. Again, if we could change it to suit our inclination of the moment, I would rearrange it. But no, it's frozen in time. It follows me wherever I go. It's true no matter what my circumstances are. If I wake up in prison, if I win the lottery, if my life is really changed in some major way, I'll still have the same fingerprints. I'll still have inspire the masses as my life purpose. So sometimes in my life, that looks like starting a school. Other times in my life, it looks like talking here, writing a book. It can look different at different times, but you have a life purpose printed in your fingerprints prior to birth. And no matter what is happening, that map follows you around. And I'm also here to tell you it's not necessarily what you would want it to be. Very often, life purpose is completely surprising to the owner. So I've been doing talks for a long time. How many know who Candy Lightner is? Everybody would have raised their hands 30 some odd years ago. She founded Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Does anybody, have you heard of Mothers Against Drunk Driving? She's the founder. Do you know her story? Her teenage girl was killed by a drunk driver. She would give anything to have her daughter back. But this led to that, led to this, led to that. She started Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and look at the work it's done through the years. That's where her major soul fulfillment has been found. She had a destiny, an exalted destiny possibility, not one that she would have thought of, not one that she would have naturally gone in for. But destiny isn't necessarily what you want it to be. Many people with leadership-oriented life purposes, as a matter of fact, the majority of those I've read who have leadership-oriented life purposes don't like leaders. They're all a bunch of no-goodniks. Can't make me do any of that. I'm not gonna. You can't make me. I'm not making anybody do anything. Your hand has a map as to where your deepest meaning can be found. Live in accordance with that map, and you have good days, you have bad days. Life is better, life is work, but you're on purpose. And knowing you're on purpose, well, for me, that's a golden anchor. No matter what else, no matter how bad things can be, I'm still on purpose. Again, my golden anchor. So I came down last night from Sausalito with my wife. We rented a house in the hills around here. We couldn't get the thermostat to work. It was working on, it was air conditioning the house last night and not doing any heat. We were up several hours doing that. Have you ever Airbnb'd and had any problem with the place you rent? Oh my word, it's just terrible. But I'm down here doing my life purpose. how bad can things be? Things can't be bad. That doesn't mean that every day fits the picture of what I would prefer to have happen. But I have a compass. I have a life compass that I've been able to decode. I decoded my own fingerprints in 1980, actually the end of 79. I decoded the fingerprints. I decoded mine. I looked at all the people in my family. We talked about what we found. For the next few months, every hand I read, I included the fingerprints as part of the reading. It changed what I found in people's hands. And then I moved to California because I was living in Texas, and the International Institute of Hand Analysis did not want to be in Texas, it told me. So instead I moved to California, and like I said, we had our 34th birthday, a few months ago. So, would you like to ask me any questions about hand reading in general, fingerprints, life purpose? You have a question? Oh, tell me. Yes.
I once was told that your left hand and your right hand are different, and that your left hand is like doesn't change and your right hand does, or
right.
Vice versa. Is that true?
So what's your name?
Jenny.
Jen?
Jenny.
Jenny. Jenny was told that the left hand is what you were born with it doesn't change, and the right hand keeps changing.
Yeah.
Yes, that's one of the few things that palmistry books agree on. It turns out to be false, which is easily quantifiable by taking handprints of yourself once a year, or more often, and then watching and see if the left hand has changed or not. So I have handprints going back to 1980 of me, and my left hand has changed significantly, so has my right. I'm still recognizable. I have pictures of me in albums, just like you have family albums. I can still recognize me. I look a little different back then, but I can still recognize me. The hand is still recognizably me, but there's quite a bit that's different on the left and the right hands. The fingerprints have not changed in that time. Both hands represent you, which is very interesting. So apparently the people who wrote that in palmistry books didn't do comparative handprinting and just wrote down something that they read somewhere else. And a lot of handbooks are like that. They write down something that they read somewhere else. There are other handbooks that are really good. Has anybody here read a palmistry book? There are some that are really accurate. Really accurate. These people must have worked really hard to put together such an accurate dictionary. But imagine that you went to some country that had a different language, different alphabet, different culture. Imagine going to Russia and you had a really good dictionary. Do you think that's going to suffice for you to carry on conversations with everybody? I don't think so. No, that's not enough. You need context, you need culture, and each word can have different meanings depending upon which sentence it's in. Exactly. Right.
I don't know if this is an obvious question, but does genetics have to do anything with it?
Genetics is the question about genetics. What's your name?
Jen.
Jen?
Yeah.
Oh, her name is Jen. That's all right. Jen is asking me about genetics. Okay, exactly. So the doctors are big on that. Some of the original research studies in the medical textbooks are twin studies. There's a lot of twin studies. Twins separated at birth, triplets separated at birth. They have different environments, but their hands are similar in some way. Their fingerprints are similar. As a matter of fact, up until the 1970s, the most scientifically solid test to see whether you were a triplet with somebody else was the fingerprint test. DNA tests are more accurate, and then they took over. But up until then, it was the dermatoglyphic test that was used. So yes, so to oversimplify, twins have fingerprints that are more similar to each other than brothers and sisters do. And brothers and sisters have fingerprints that are more similar than just two people picked at random. And the difference between brother and sister, the difference from just two people at random, let's say, is 0.5 on some scale. The difference for triplets is 0.85 on that same scale. So yeah, genetics are part of it. And to oversimplify what the doctors have said in the medical textbooks is, most of the research, by the way, is to see whether these fingerprints are associated with autism. These fingerprints are associated with schizophrenia. These fingerprints are associated with being gay, as if gay and autism and schizophrenia go in the same list of categories. That's most of the research being done. And what the doctors have concluded, to oversimplify things, is genetics accounts for about a third of what goes on in the fingerprints. Intrauterine environment, whether your mother smoked, drank coffee, how much coffee, how many cigarettes in the morning, how many, carefully studied and quantified, affects the intrauterine environment, and the fingerprints look different. And the other 1/3, they say, we need more research money. Please get us more research money, and we'll figure out what the other third is. So I say the other third is your life purpose map. That's what the other third is. Right. So what's your name? Joanna. You're not a Jen, but okay. So Joanna read that ring finger compared to index finger length, testosterone in the womb, etc., like that. Yeah, but if you read the studies, the variation is really small. So yes, it's significant enough to write a paper about, but not significant enough to mean anything. And also, it's without context. So it was easy enough for me to see your long finger on the mercury finger, and it's so large it doesn't matter what the rest is. I know you're the way I was telling you about. But if your index finger is short or long, if your ring finger is long or short, that's one of an ensemble of markers I need to look at. So Carl Jung wrote an introduction to a palmistry book back in the 1930s. You all know who I'm talking about, Carl Jung? Okay. So his handprint is there. So I have his fingerprints. I have his handprint from 1930-something, 1937. He has about as short an index finger as is possible. So short index-fingered people. The palmistry name for the index finger is Zeus. Do you know who Zeus is? You know who's the Greek god? Yeah, you know which god? You know who Zeus is? Notice how I'm talking. Do you know who Zeus is? He's the king god. He sits on the big chair and you don't. He says what you do, and if you don't do it, then what happens? You're in trouble, because he's bigger than everybody else, and he'll tie you to a rock and have a raven eat your liver out for eternity. That's what he did to Prometheus. It's just a story. So some people have more Zeusness and some people have less. But it's part of a larger deal. My point is this. You probably don't know much about Carl Jung's life, I'm assuming. So I've read hands for 29 years in Switzerland. I taught hands in Switzerland. I was out there 2 months a year. I stopped doing that just fairly recently because of the toll of travel. And besides which, I have other people who teach this stuff now. So the place I stayed in Zurich is right next to the Jung Center. Not a Jung Center, the Jung Center, out the window. That's where Jung did his thing. And I read for several people who studied with him back then. He had as short a Zeus finger as is possible. And yet, he was a tyrant. He walked around, he strutted through Zurich with his mistress on his arm, and he made his wife walk 3 paces behind through the expensive part of town, so everybody would know who was in charge of what around here. But he was a short Zeus figure. He was short and he compensated. That's like the short kid in school picking fights. Yeah, but I'm telling you, because I've read them, students send that to me, did you read this new thing, etc. And then the studies about this is the gay gene, we could see it this way in the fingerprints, etc. The variations are too minute to be significant. The difference is only a few percentage points. It's enough to write a paper on, it's not enough to do anything with, and it doesn't take the larger context. There could be counterindicators, is my point. But I'm glad you read something. And as a matter of fact, every year there are articles that come out in Time magazine, there's articles that come out on your phone. Every year there's several articles correlating another hand trait to human behavior, another fingerprint trait. The ones that have been more successful revolve around the autism spectrum. And there are markers in the hand associated with that the scientific world agrees with. Those are markers associated with different parts of the spectrum. Isn't that useful? It's a non-intrusive test. All you have to do is put your hand on a Xerox machine, and they could look at your fingerprints, and they have 6 different things that they record, and if you have 5 of the 6, well, time to do more serious testing. Isn't that interesting? Yes, ma'am.
My question is it possible to have mirror hands? I get was very, very much for that than the right.
So what's your name? Flor de Mayo? Did I get close? Oh, excellent. So the question is, can you have hands that mirror each other very closely? Absolutely. Both hands are representative of you in general. In general. The left hand is you when you're not expecting company, and the right hand is you when you were expecting company. The left hand is you without your makeup on, and the right hand is you fixed up for presentation. They ought to look somewhat alike with a few differences. There are some people where they look almost exactly alike because what you see is what you get with that person. If you're that person, it doesn't matter whether you caught them unawares or whether they knew for 2 weeks that you were coming over. There are other people, this is rare though, there are other people where their left and right hands look like 2 completely different people. What I found is they live completely different lives. They have one group of friends over here, maybe they have their metaphysical group of friends, their spiritual oriented friends who get hand readings and who knows what else crazy that they do. And then they have their businessy friends over here. With these people, they wear these clothes. With those people, they wear those clothes. As a matter of fact, that was me when I started reading hands. Because the job I quit to do this full time, I was a financial advisor. I had 400 clients. I was working in Houston. I had an office. I had a suit and tie. I was doing hands on the side. And as a matter of fact, what would happen is, I'd be doing a financial planning seminar someplace, and somebody say, "Didn't I see you on TV? You're the one who reads hands." Nobody cared anymore about estate planning. Everybody wanted a hand reading. And actually, I wanted to read their hands more than I wanted to talk to them about their estate. Things took a turn from there to where I am today.
Hi. So the system that you came up with to decode your fingerprints, does that come from an old tradition or spiritual?
No, what's your name?
Orly.
Orly? Yeah. The question is this an old tradition? And am I building on an old? No. It appeared in my brain whole intact, as if I was remembering it. While I was sitting in the medical libraries reading fingerprint palms and souls, I was reading about soul mapping. That's my interpretation. Maybe somewhere in some other lifetime, if there are such things, I was doing stuff like that. I don't know. But in the medical libraries, I knew in an instant the entire system that I've taught to whatever, 1,000 people by now. And the only thing I've changed, I haven't changed anything about the logistics of that. What I've changed is how I talk about it. I've found better ways of communicating about it, and better ways for the people I teach to communicate with their clients about it. So I've learned some utility factors, how to deploy it more effectively. But it was in my brain whole intact in an instant. And however you want to interpret that. I mean, I play with it was a download. I don't know how, but I know my life changed in that instant. And there I am right now. I could see myself sitting in my little cubicle in the Jesse Jones Library as I'm looking at the picture at the bottom of the page of the chemical precipitate. So I've taught the system to hundreds of people, approximately 1,000 at this point. And about 20% of therapists, counselors from a wide range of different backgrounds. They report that they use the system with their clients and they're effective using it as well. And they range from Jungian therapists to people who think that Jung was crazy. So whatever it is, it has worked really well. And it's a pleasure and a privilege for me to look in somebody's hands and talk to them about what that exalted destiny possibility is, and to suggest to them to be on the lookout for it. See if it's knocking on your window every day this next week. Yeah, so does the pattern in the fingerprint correspond to the, Fibonacci circle? Yeah. So there are 4 basic patterns that appear in fingerprints, and one looks like a spiral, and the variations on that spiral have meaning. The spiral is usually held up by 2 triradii points, and the position of those 2 relative to each other. The condition of the core of the pattern has a meaning. However, most of the time, I'm not looking at those meanings. What I'm looking at is the 10 fingerprints in toto, and I'm noting that you have a Fibonacci pattern on this finger. You have one of the other 4 over here, another 4 over there. I'm adding up how many of each different type you have, the fingers that you have. I do this in just a matter of seconds. To me, it's like reading a newspaper. And there's a print out there that I've seen before, who knows how many times, and I know what it's saying about you. Plus, I've got your hands, and usually, I've got the person to talk to. I don't have Carl Jung to talk to. He left the planet long ago. I can see his fingerprints in his hands. But mostly, I've got the person right there to talk to. I'll tell you one quick aside while I'm thinking about it. So about 25 years ago, I talked to a fellow who was a retired prison guard who had a hobby of collecting fingerprints. And we talked on the phone, blah, blah, this, blah, blah, that. And I sent him the fingerprints of Albert Einstein, which I had from an old policy book. And he sent me Martin Luther King's fingerprints and JFK's fingerprints. This is a long enough time ago that the picture of Martin Luther King's fingerprints appeared line by line across my computer. It didn't just appear. Can you imagine? I had to wait 90 seconds as line by line the fingerprint filled in of Martin Luther King's fingerprints. So Martin Luther King had a life purpose, just like you and me. Martin Luther King, and I read for other people who have the same life purpose, but it's not one of the more common ones. He had mentor, wise elder, live a life of special integrity, with a message for the masses. Wise elder with a message for the masses. Does it sound like he was living his exalted destiny? It sounds really like he was living his exalted destiny. So that was in his fingerprints before he was born. Somehow, when he was in kindergarten, he was a kid of integrity, and other people learned how to tie their shoelaces, and it changed their life because Martin was part of their learning program about learning how to tie shoelaces. Because all along, there was a theme in his life, probably not visible to him or his mommy or daddy early on, but if they had had the fingerprint map, it was there and it was expressing itself. How much more powerful to know that if you're somebody's parent. You have a question or comment? Human design is the question. Am I familiar with human design? Okay. So various of my students either had learned human design or go on to learn human design afterwards, and they tell me that there's a lot of correlation. I haven't looked into it, so I have no personal comment other than the students who talk to me about it think that there's a big parallel. The same thing with other types of studies. The Michael work, are you familiar with the Michael studies? Blah, blah, blah. The Michael archetypes look just like the archetypes in the hand, Richard. I said, oh, that's interesting, etc.
What about polygamy or exogamity? Was that any additional information or?
What's your name?
Natalie.
Natalie. So you're asking me about people with 6 hands or fingers stuck together with each other?
Or any sort of extra.
Yeah, that stuff happens. And it happens in a predictable amount. And different cultures have different amounts of it. It's been studied in incredible detail. But not from the perspective of a hand reader studying that information, because that just hasn't been done yet. At least nothing that I've read, and I'm up to date as of last year. Nothing I've read at this point. It does vary culturally. Some cultures have a lot more of one particular version of it than others. There's a genetic component to it, but it's not straight genetics either. And when I look at somebody's hands, if they have something very unusual, the little finger is dwarfed or something like that, I know what that means palmistically. And I ask them whether or not there are other people in their family with it. There usually is. And there's a family pattern of something. Whether they fall prey to the family pattern and get consumed by it, or they're able to step out of it, because that's usually some sort of negative behavioral family pattern that has probably been ongoing for 8 generations or more. It's kind of baked in there somehow. One of the advantages I had when I read hands in Zurich is I would read for families. And when I say families, I mean the grandparents, the great-grandparents, the siblings, everybody lives in the same town. If somebody moves away, it means that they just moved 20 miles out of town. So I can look at everybody's hands. And I worked in clinics where there were kids, 2 specific clinics where there were kids who had a variety of problems enough that the clinic was looking at things. And generally, if I got to read the hands of one of the kids, the clinic couldn't find any reason for what the physical symptomology was and why they were behaving the way they were. And when I looked at their hands, usually it's because there was nothing in their hands to explain their symptomology. But when I looked at their hands and then the larger family story, then it became clear. They didn't fit in that family. There was a family story. There's a couple of themes in this family. This guy doesn't fit in. Imagine that you're an artist type and everybody else is a scientist type who think that artists are like low beings. And that's who you are, and you're already that way, and you're only 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And the message you receive every day is don't be the way you are. What if you're an intuitive type, built to do intuitive readings for people? Are there people like that? Yes, there are people like that. Let's say that's who you really are, and you grow up in a family that thinks that's wrong for some reason. Who knows why? Or let's say that you grow up in a family with everybody being very intuitive, spiritual, and you have a tech-heavy hand, and nothing better than being an engineer would suit you. Are your parents big enough to step outside their own picture of who you're supposed to be and support you being who you really are? That's an interesting question, and I can tell you this. Having that conversation with parents and having a translator translate, telling 2 Swiss parents what they were doing wrong in raising their child and how it could be different if they raise their child differently, that's an interesting communication environment. Let me take one more question, maybe 2 more questions. Before I forget, let me tell you that Nadia, a master hand analyst, a teacher at the Institute of Hand Analysis, and I have a booth about 80 yards in that direction. We're doing readings today and tomorrow, if that's of interest. Anybody here who might want to attend a seminar, we'll be doing a seminar on life purpose stuff fingerprints in February, if that's of interest. See me, see Nadia, put your name down so we can get in touch with you. Okay, that's enough of that. A couple more questions. Are you saying people who had hand readings before? Oh, okay. So, JFK had a Inspire the Masses life purpose. That's an interesting one. Of all the dead presidents, he's the only one whose fingerprints I have, of which I have almost all of them except Reagan. He's the only one with an inspiration-based life purpose. And I'm old enough to remember JFK as president, and he was inspiring. All the others have power-based life purposes of one type or another. Nixon had a guilt-based life purpose, etc. No, not his fingerprints. I've seen his hands. Obama has a philosopher hand. If he had left a handprint on a cave wall 10,000 years ago, I'd know he was the philosopher in the group. He's the one writing books, studying things. He's in the library. So what did Obama do with a lot of his life? He was a professor. He kind of acted like a professor. Was his position carefully thought out with many different variables to consider? Yeah. If you didn't like what he did, he thinks too much. If you liked what he did, he was thoughtful and considerate. Does our current president have a long headline, do you think? No, our current president does not think things out. He makes up his mind. He doesn't make up his mind. He makes up his gut. And then doesn't change it no matter what the new information is. There are people like that. I've met people with Trump's handshake who got through law school without studying, got through med school without studying. That's really a stable genius to be able to pull that off. And then there are others with that handshake who act differently. One more question? Oh, then let me get somebody who didn't ask one. Oh, okay, your turn. Do I study the expression of how you hold your hands and stuff? Not so much. But I do look at your hand shapes very, very carefully. And there's maybe 125 hand shapes I know by silhouette alone. Imagine somebody with binoculars looking at the airplane. Oh, that's a B-52. Oh, that's a P-39. They can see it by the silhouette. Well, I can see your handprint on a cave wall, or your handprint's right here, and I know whether you're a philosopher archetype, whether you're one of the other 124 archetypes I know by silhouette alone. The lines will either be consistent with that archetype or very, very different. And then I can talk to you about how you're living your life. Are you living consistent with your hand shape and lines? The first rule in palmistry, the first rule is to be your type. If you're not living the type you is, things go haywire. No wonder you have problems. No wonder you're on your 12th marriage. If you're not living your archetype. If you are living your archetype, that doesn't get you to your life purpose. That merely opens the gate. You put your hand on the biometric reader, the gate opens. If you're in the proper costume, the gate will open. You're free to do your life purpose, or not. But if you're not in costume, the gate will not open. And your life is about getting in costume, because you must be the type you are. For some types, that's no big deal. Long pinky people, that's an easy one for long pinky people. Their challenges are elsewhere. But for some people, being their type is countercultural. And it's very interesting. Reading in the middle of the country, reading in Zurich, reading in California, what is countercultural is different from one place to the next. And I'll tell you something, the Bay Area where I live, it's not just one culture. Sausalito is one culture, the city is a different culture, Palo Alto, etc., etc. Thank you all very much. You helped me live my life purpose today, and I'm glad to talk to you more about hands if you are so inclined.